Without a doubt, the most famous horror movie of all time is The Exorcist. Released in 1973, it tells the story of Regan, a little girl who gets possessed by a powerful entity and the only hope she has relays in the hands of Father Karras. The Exorcist was a pioneer of its genre. The ominous atmosphere that encapsulates the film from start to end is immaculate. The opening scene of Regan's window going down to the street, there is this ominous sound effect that mixes with the wind, almost like a silent threat, like there is something hiding in plain sight. Then we transition to a close-up of a statue of the Virgin Mary with sharp shadows on it, almost representing that even upon the most holy figures, there's darkness in it. When I do this type of videos, I usually end up rewatching the movie I will be talking about a couple of times. And in my second run of this movie, I was in my place, alone, and it was night. And I had to turn it off and put on something else, so I had to watch it later the next day during the morning, when there was light. The special effects of this movie by the time, they were unprecedented. Practical effects have proven to beat the test of time. There is just something terrifyingly raw in the way Regan is shaking on the bed. The way her body moves like a ragdoll is completely defenseless and unable to control herself. Nowadays, possession scenes had gotten more experimental. This gives the moment a more otherworldly sensation, which in concept, possessions are otherworldly, but somehow, also nowadays, they feel tamer. Most possessions have their eyes rolling back and extremities snapping. Everything happens slow, as if trying to shock the audience by keeping these images more time on the screen. But the abruptness in The Exorcist is simply unsettling. This entity is manhandling Regan. It's very brutal. I want to recognize all of this before I move to my main point. Saying The Exorcist is not a horror movie would be straight up wrong. But The Exorcist, in my eyes, is not only that. It is a very heavy personal drama. It is what people nowadays would be calling elevated horror. In modern times, this trend began with The Babadook, and it seems that the best horror movies are elevated horror or conceptual horror. I have made this argument before that The Exorcist, in my book, is the first elevated horror movie, which brings this other argument that elevated horror is just a term to classify horror movies with a more complex story or being an allegory for something else. Or, to put it in a much more simpler way, elevated horror is just horror movies with a proper, well-crafted story that just not revolves around scaring the audience, but actually trying to say something. And this lands me back to my argument. When people talk about The Exorcist, it's mostly merited for the things that I already mentioned, which are 100% valid. It is a transcending movie. But something that tends to be shrugged off is the amazing drama underneath all of the supernatural horror. So, what am I talking about? In The Exorcist, we have two main storylines, Chris with Regan and Damien Karras. And well, we obviously have Father Merrin, who is the catalyst for this whole movie, but in here, he is just that, the catalyst. The movie starts on a very ominous note. Throughout these first scenes, we meet Merrin, who is in the desert. Upon finding the head of a strange statue, the atmosphere around him changes. It feels like something is chasing him. And indeed, it is. A demon he once exorcised from a little boy. And Merrin is aware that something big is after him, reason why he decides to leave Iraq. He knows that he cannot be there anymore. The duel between the two of them is established right at the start, and this set into motion the rest of the movie. We meet Chris and Regan, mother and daughter. Chris is currently getting a divorce from Regan's father, and since Chris is a public figure, this news can be seen on a gossip magazine. It's almost unescapable for Regan to be reminded of her parents' separation everywhere, and with this, Chris is trying to do her best to keep a brave face for her daughter. We then are presented with the beautiful bond Chris and Regan has. Just overall, we see the people around them caring for them. It's a very wholesome scenario. Then we have the contrast of Father Karras. He is someone who the scientific studies led him into religion, believing there is an important bridge between the two. More than two forces that work against each other, they should work together. His situation is a very dreary one. As a man of the church, he really doesn't have the means to pay for a better treatment for his mother. And given how he depends on the church to transfer him so he can be closer to her, he is growing more frustrated about the situation. In both of these storylines, you have something in common: vulnerability. When it comes to possession in Catholic or Christian religion, it is believed that the demons will attach to those with a weak faith. I am sure that if you are a fan of possession movies, you have seen this theme where the demon seems to fuck around with the victim before they possess them. Well, this is not a tool used by screenwriters to build up tension. This is genuinely how demons supposedly operate. They need to wear down the mind and spirit of their victim so they can overpower their will and possess them. This with the means of making a mockery out of the biggest gift God gave us, our free will. The demons want their victims weak so they can strip them from it. Don't worry, I'm not getting religious here, this is a textual explanation. And this movie is nothing different. Regan is a vulnerable child. Her mother is doing her best to give to her all the support to fill her emotional needs. It is inevitable for the absence of her father to affect her. In a moment that is very easy to miss, when Regan has the magazine talking about her parents' divorce, it appears that Regan's father is called Howard. And how does she call the spirit she talks to using the Ouija board? Captain Howdy. Very similar, right? It's almost like Pazuzu is using Regan's vulnerabilities against her. In a brief scene that can't seem out of place, we can see Chris desperately trying to contact Regan's father because he has completely disappeared from her life. So much that he completely forgot to call Regan on her birthday. We are presented with Regan listening to everything, understandably disheartened. And this is what I mean with the underlying personal drama slowly fermenting under the horror. When we talk about this movie, all eyes are on Karras and his own guilt for not being able to do more for his mother. So the storyline going on in the McNeil house is disregarded, because Regan's suffering does not stop there. She is then submitted to some harrowing medical exams. The scenes at the hospital are very raw. The needle going into Regan's throat is so hard to see, and then you have blood shooting out of the tube. The needle going into Regan's throat and then having the blood shooting out of the tube, it is very hard to watch. This is not considered gore in horror movies. We are not getting shocked from watching gods or someone being dismembered. We are watching actual medical exams being made. It is so realistic and impossible for any of us to have to go through such a treatment. It sends shivers down my spine. When we see some brutal gore in movies, there is this part of us that see that graphic violence as fiction, but with Regan's medical exams, they feel much realistic. It adds to the pain and the angst. It was barbaric. And with this, we add the element that Chris, the mother of Regan, is watching all of this happening. So, as I was saying before, demons possess people with a weak spirit or body since it is easier. They lack strength. How do you debilitate the body and mind of a mother and a daughter simultaneously, making the daughter suffer and allowing the mother to watch? And we cannot ignore the extra layer of how economically well off Chris McNeil is. She has all the money and all the connections she needs. She has all of the specialists there can be. And still, there is no answer to what's going on with Regan. There is no cure and things are only getting worse. Her money means nothing. So, if we take off from the equation the paranormal horror obviously taking place, you have the fight of a mother against what it seems to be a disease that is taking away her child. Whatever is happening to Regan, it's killing her, and Chris can do nothing. As a mother, that's a terrifying experience. So many people in this world have experienced watching someone they love deteriorate and succumb into a sickness without being able to do anything. And this is almost like an allegory for that. There are some strong emotional strings being pulled here. Instead of weakening the vessels by playing some tricks and jump scares here and there, we are playing with their actual hope and faith. In here, Regan and Chris are really getting emotionally and mentally worn down. And this is something that we rarely get to see in possession movies. Since it is a horror movie, they try to keep you scared all of the time. And instead of focusing in atmosphere, they focus on cramming scares, torturing the vessel with just fear of the unknown. Which is valid, but it deprives the audience from the emotional investment you get with how the Exorcist did it. By the moment Pazuzu is successful in taking over Regan, Chris desperately goes to Father Karras. Let alone the nasty bruise on her face, she looks absolutely defeated. She is literally holding on to her last thread, abandoning science and going to God. It's like that saying, things got so bad, you have me praying to a God I don't believe in. And by then, both Chris and Regan had been so worn down, the possession is complete. And none of this happens organically. It's compelling, it feels genuine. The possession is a really slow burn that gives time and space for the storylines to develop. In my eyes, The Possession of Regan is not just for scares, and it's not only a horror movie. It is truly a down spiral where there seems to be no answer, no escape. When Chris goes to ask Karas for help and he begins listing just how complicated it is for the church to approve an exorcism while Regan is on the edge of losing her life, it is like there's no out, and Chris will lose her daughter. This is why The Exorcist is simply the best horror movie of all time. There is all this human conflict going on before we even get to the possession. The movie is around 2 hours long, and the exorcism takes place in the last 20 minutes. In parallel to this, we have the story of Father Karas and his guilt for not being able to be there for his mother. Like I said at the start, and I repeat here again, this is the storyline that is most talked about, and Regan's possession is seen as his redemption. Which it is, but it always makes me feel that some people see Chris MacNeil's storyline happening to give Karas his redemption as only that, when it is a whole story of its own, and that's why it works, and why this movie feels so real. Regan doesn't get possessed just for it to be a horror movie or for Karas to have a reason to be there. There are two separate stories that collide with this same issue. Karas is unable to give his mother what she needed and to be there for her, which means that he was not able to save her. And Chris right now is unable to save his daughter. It's the same duel. In the case of Karas, he was looking forward to being transferred as to be with his mother and take better care of her. However, the church doesn't approve this or hasn't given him an answer about his transfer, and in that span of time, his mother dies. It is stated she died alone and it took 4 entire days for someone to notice she had died. And so, this issue ponders the question, how cruel can God be? How cruel is the church for not letting him transfer when his own mother needed him? Isn't the church supposed to be this graceful institution? Why did they abandon him? This is a test of fate for Karas. How the institution failed him can be parallel on how they were going to also fail Regan by putting all of these obstacles to approve her exorcism. And that's when his redemption begins. He begins rushing, trying to collect the evidence needed as fast as he can be, because in this case, everyone was too slow for him to be there on time. God was cruel to him. The church was cruel to him as well. Is he going to be cruel too and abandon Chris and Regan and let the child perish? No, he won't. And of course, this leads to the sacrifice at the end of the movie as to redeem himself and fulfill his mission of saving Regan, assuring they were successful in this fight after Father Merrin gave his life for it. I know I'm cutting short Karas' story, but as the main character arc in the movie, I feel there's enough discussions and videos about him. But I rarely find content talking about Chris and Regan's journey. Maybe because there isn't an actual character development in there. But for me, the way Chris's desperation to save her daughter and how painful it is to be passed around experts, feeling no one really cares or that no one is actually trying to help you, is super compelling and why I like it so much. For being a supernatural horror movie, it gets pretty human at its core. Now, everything that I have stated here is coming from the lens of The Exorcist being its own piece of media. I have not read the book and I am not taking the sequels into consideration. I wrote this considering The Exorcist as a standalone. So, in case you were thinking I was ignoring certain information or that I don't know enough about The Exorcist, that wasn't the intention. As always, I wanted to focus on the story presented on this one movie and what I like and think about it. And also, my interest about making this movie is that I recently watched Exorcist Believer, the recent movie in the Exorcist franchise. Trying to bring back the franchise was a bold move, and I was interested in seeing where did it fail compared to the first one. The team behind The Exorcist Believer was trying to go back to its roots and go for the same human element like in the first The Exorcist. But that is something that I will be boarding on the next video that I hope I'll have ready as soon as possible. If you make it all the way here, thank you so much for watching.